Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our qualitative research class. So I think for today's meeting, what we're going to talk about is a review of the lectures that we have, particularly for modules number 1 and 2. Hopefully, we will now proceed with module number 2 to 3 in the discussion itself of qualitative research. Let me just share my slide. Share. Oh, wait. I think I have not. Let me just. Okay, I will now share. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, I think previously we had the initial discussion of what research is all about. We said that we were going to talk about practical research 1, we will talk about qualitative research, and there are processes that we have to be able to understand in trying to be able to do qualitative research. We said that research is a complex matter and that it entails, patience, understanding, and you be able to do more in terms of trying to look for references for your particular research. We also said that when we begin research, we will not be able to ask you immediately of the title, but the beginning part would be asking you for topics. Okay, as an activity, I will already ask you to. I think I did ask last meeting for you to be able to look for 5 topics already. When we have our face-to-face, we will have to talk about it, the 5 topics. And with that 5 topics, be specific so as you'll be able to later on ask you to be able to look for references for each of the topics that you will be hopefully venturing into your research. We also said that when we talk about qualitative research, we mean that we are going to do descriptive. We're going to use words. We're trying to be able to interpret the experiences and the phenomena, the practices of an individual, organization, and we'll be able to try to code it and be able to create themes and being able to answer later on the research questions that you are going to be able to formulate later on. Okay. And then the initial step for doing research is you have to be able to ask questions. That's the most important thing in doing your research. And of course, plus the inquiry-based method. So you have to be able to inquire later on using the scientific steps. Now, going back to our discussion, I think this was mentioned before of the important factors to consider in selecting a research problem. So later on, when you have your topic has been approved already, you have to consider number 1, your interest. You have to choose the 5 topics that you like. It must be feasible, meaning it is researchable, it is logical, and that it will be easier for you to be able to later on do the data collection, and your ability and training. The number 3 is that you will be taught on how you're going to be able to do your research, the step-by-step process, and many more. I think I remember I also send in the messenger the thesis, the different thesis parts, which will contain chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, I'd like you to be familiar with those chapters, especially in the proposal part, because by midterms, hopefully, you will have to complete your chapters 1, 2, and 3, and the final part would include all of the chapters. So what we're going to do in research is that we are going to be able to do it, again, step by step, from your introduction to the creation of your problem statement, to your research questions, and then eventually going to your review of related literature, your synthesis, and then of which we will hopefully go to chapter 3, which we would talk about methodology, your research design, your sampling technique, your population, and your particular research design. Kung case study man yan, ethnography, phenomenology, or a grounded theory, which later on, again, we're going to be able to talk about the 4 important types of qualitative research. To move on, This is very important when we talk about research ethics. Importante ito because no, when we do research, we're not just going to do it because we want to do it and because it's a requirement in school, but we have to talk about ethics because, as made mention in the slide, we have to deal with beliefs about what is right or wrong. Some people would be able to give you really good feedback, some of them not so good feedbacks, the proper or improper, good or bad. To be ethical is to conform to accepted professional practice. So in research, you do certain standards that you cannot just simply do your interview without asking permission. You cannot just simply print it or publish it without undergoing those ethical procedures in doing research. Now, ethics, in a broad definition, we talk about the principles for guiding your decision making, and you try to reconcile those conflicting values. Again, there's a disagreement because it would be based on people's personal value system. But when you do your research, no, you cannot render your comments or feedbacks about it because you will be able to collect whatever answers that they're going to be able to give you when you interview them. So what one person considers to be good or right may be considered bad or wrong by another person. So learning to understand the so-called ethics, no, a difference between morality. Now, the goal of ethics in research is for us to ensure that no one is harmed, okay, that everyone is safe and no one is suffering from the consequences from you, from the research activity that you're going to do. Yung hindi mas-stress yung interviewin ninyo, hindi sila maapektuhan emotionally, psychologically. No, that's the goal of ethics. Now, there is no absolute ethics because when we talk about ethics, now the ethical standards are expressed as absolutes but must operate relatively. Now, it says here that the accepted ethics on a specific period or location can change relatively to change of period and location. Let's say there are standards in the Philippines that are different from the standards in America, in Europe, or any other continents of the world. Now, ethics is the way to conduct a research with integrity and moral. No, it should be moral. So the human research ethics, so we have to talk about the basics of this one. When we talk about researching human beings, which you're going to be able to do, the first is research conducted with people and research conducted about people in dealing with certain data or issues. Hindi tissue yan, issues. So why is research very important to us? Again, going back no, in our previous discussion, it's a reflection of respect for those who take part in research, and it ensures no unreasonable, unsafe, or thoughtless demands are made by the researchers. And a researcher, you know, or research itself generally must ensure sufficient knowledge is shared by all concerned. And whatever data that you will be collecting, the results, you have to be able to share it to people, especially those whom you have interviewed. Now, it composes a common standard in all above respects. Now, why is research ethics important again? Now, this has become the norm as an expectation when we do research activity, that we have to be able to follow certain standards. A professional requirement, for example, for practitioners in some disciplines, let's say psychology, be it in education generally, a requirement for access to participants in others. Let's say access to whatever information they may be able to require. Now, there are ethical guiding principles that we have to consider when we do research. You have to respect the human dignity, the background of the person, the ethnicity, the demographics of which he or she belongs, whether he's Filipino, American, or whatever is the ethnic background. You have to respect the free and informed consent. You have to ask permission. Later on, when you're going to be able to interview, you have to be able to ask permission from your teacher, from the person that you're going to be able to interview, from, let's say, a government official and others. Respect for the vulnerable persons, those who are disabled, those who are senior citizens, those with disability, the privacy and confidentiality. Anything that you will be asking your participants in terms of the research questions are all confidential, that you're going to be able to do it for research. And that's why you're not going to be able to put their names in the actual research, but you have to be able to identify them with a certain code. Let's say P1, participant 1, or participant A, and many others. Now we have to balance the harms and definitely the benefits. We have to minimize the harm. Let's say when we're going to do research about disabled persons, we have to be sensitive in the questions that we're going to ask. No, sometimes when you ask direct to the point questions, it might be hurting. For example, let's say when you are going to interview a person with disability, kunyari, may cerebral palsy. When you talk about patients with cerebral palsy, these are children na stiff yung kanilang muscles. And meron silang parang stiff yung muscles nila, and that's why they can't walk. So when you ask questions, for example, when you ask, let's say you're doing a research about the lived experiences of parents with children with cerebral palsy, okay? You cannot ask them, for example, direct questions that might be hurting, okay? So ang anak nyo ay may cerebral palsy. Ano ang nararamdaman ninyo sa kondisyon ng anak nyo na meron siyang kapansanan? So you might want to, try to change the manner of your question in such a way that it won't be hurting. You might probably just ask, how do you feel that you have a son or daughter with such a condition? Ano hong nararamdaman ninyo na meron po kayong anak na may kondisyon, na may ganyang klaseng kondisyon? So lalabas na yon. So you also have to maximize the benefit of it, that you are doing this primarily to help the parents with cerebral palsy, or you're doing this research, for example, in business, to be able to help, let's say, young entrepreneurs like you. So the human dignity, there are cardinal principles, there are basics, ethical obligations. There are two important essential components: selection, achievement, morally acceptable ends, and the morally acceptable means to those ends. Okay, we have to protect the multiple. Excuse me. Matching pa ako. Okay, I'm so sorry. We have to protect the multiple and independent interests of the person. Again, we have to respect their body. Okay, we have to respect whatever condition, yung psychological, cultural, or cultural integrity. Let's say you cannot ask personal questions if it's not related to your research questions or the ones that you're doing. Okay? Hindi mo po pwede, bakit to ganyan ang itsura ninyo? Hindi pwede yon, because wala naman yun doon sa research mo. So that would be foul, meaning that will go against the dignity of the person. Number two, you have to ask consent. Palagi itong sinasabi that before you interview someone, you have to ask permission. Presumption that individuals has the capacity and the right to make free and informed decisions. Let's say yung interview mo would say no to you, you just have to respect that decision, that you cannot interview that person. So in research, you have to do dialogue. You have to check on the processes. You have to check on the rights of your participant. Your very own duty as a researcher, and the requirements that you need in terms of the free and informed consent by the research subject. For example, if minor yan, you have to solicit permission coming from the parents. No, if it's really a sensitive ethnical group, kunyari, you're going to be able to interview the Mangyans or the Badjaos, you need to be able to solicit permission coming from the barangay captain or let's say yung pinaka-leader nila of that ethnic group. So your research cannot proceed, again, your research cannot proceed without consent because that will be very disrespectful. So remember that your research cannot proceed without consent. So especially dapat yan, you will have to really document it, no? Because when the panelists would ask you later on, have you really asked permission? So, yan, you have to show later on the letter, kaya na talagang nag-ask ka ng permission. So the consent must be maintained throughout. Number 3, vulnerable persons. Your ethical obligation towards vulnerable persons. Kunyari, you're trying to come up with a product, a business product for disabled persons. Let's say you're trying to, again, come up with a business proposal for people who are having difficulty, let's say, walking. So, kailangan mo i-consider yon. The competence, kaya niya ba, or is the person that you're going to interview mentally capable of answering your questions? Kung okay naman, wala namang problema doon. Let's say kung physical lang naman yon, okay, you can interview. But kunyari, kung may problema, let's say may mental problems, yung let's say yung interview mo may not be able to answer the right questions. Let's say in the case of a person with kunyari cerebral palsy, syempre yung parents ang interviewin nyo. So diminished decision-making capacity, hindi makapag-decide sa sarili. There are certain special protection, especially for children. Hindi nyo po pwedeng bastang interviewin yung children without the consent of the parents. So, yeah, because those children are protected against abuse, exploitation, or discrimination. And you cannot even, let's say, share the stories na nakuha ninyo with your participants, with your friends. Uy, yung na-interview ko si ganito, ang dami kong nalaman. Nalaman ko na ganito, ganyan. You can't do that because there's an informed consent. Number 4, privacy and confidentiality. This is very important to the human dignity. Hindi po nyo po pwedeng imarites yun. And the standards protect the access, control, dissemination of the personal information. Especially yung, let's say, you're going to do a qualitative research on, let's say, kunyari, a young entrepreneur's journey in creating, let's say, a particular business, no? Kunyari, kung businessman yan, fishball cart, ganyan, or halo-halo, or kung ano man yan, no? You have to be able to protect the information that you're going to be able to get to you're being able to get with your participants. Okay? So hindi niyo po pwedeng ilagay yung pangalan, okay, at mga ibang importanteng mga personal information, especially when you're going to publish it and present it. So we have to protect the mental and the psychological integrity. Okay? And the harms and the benefits, no? We have to balance this is critical to ethics human research. The foreseeable harms should not outweigh the anticipated benefits. Kung makakasama yung research ninyo, you might want to end your research. The harms, benefits, analysis, effects, welfare, and the rights of the subject. So these are nice to know things about harms and benefits. And the 6th one, justice and inclusiveness. We have to be fair, okay, in doing research. There are procedural justice. These are nice to know things. Application process, there is distributive justice, the harms and benefits. And you also have the principle of the non-maleficence. Now, this is the duty to avoid, prevent, or minimize harm to unnecessary risk of harm. The participation must be essential to achieving scientifically and societally important aims that cannot be realized without the participation of human subjects. So in this particular principle, we can minimize the harm requirements the smallest number of the participants, okay, or the human subjects that will ensure the validity of the data. We also have the idea or the principle of beneficence, the duty to benefit from others, the duty to maximize the benefits of the research that you're going to conduct. And the others are nice to know things. Okay, so the areas of focus, again, the harm, the informed consent, confidentiality, the deception. Hindi po pwede yung gagawin mo lang yung research mo because of your own personal benefit. You're not telling your participants para saan ba yung research na yan. You are deceiving the participants, which is wrong in research ethics. The results, okay, binabago mo yung results, and even the plagiarizing it. Okay, in terms of the harm, the researchers should take every precaution to ensure that participants are not subjected to undue harm or stress. You have to remember that, especially dun sa pagtatanong nyo, baka mas stress. So you really have to be able to create your research questions as you being sensitive, no, to not being able to harm them. Okay, so you have informed consent. I think this was made mention earlier already. No? There should be confidentiality between you and your participants and the research that you're going to be able to do with them. And this is very important, plagiarism, no? Meaning to kidnap. You're actually trying to get the idea of someone without asking for permission or without citing it. When you copy someone else's words without proper citation, it's stealing someone's ideas without recognizing it, stealing someone's else intellectual property. And the bottom line is that you have to cite sources properly and you have to minimize quotations in your research reports. Wala namang masama doon because you don't own, let's say, this paragraph, and that's why you're citing it. So ethical consideration conducting research, you have to be objective, you have to check on the integrity, you have to respect your participants, and you have to present the research findings to your participants. The misuse of your research role, kailangan klaro yun, that you're going to do this one primarily as an academic requirement. Acknowledgement of research collaboration assistance, so kung may mga natumulong sa iyo, you have to also recognize it. And distortions of findings by sponsor. Later on, no, kung may funding yung gagawin yung research, hindi nyo po pwedeng baguhin yung whatever findings that you're going to have just to appease or para maging masaya yung iyong sponsor, because kung yung results will yung results ng research nyo hindi yung magugustuhan yung sponsor nyo, you cannot edit it, no? Kung ano yung results, that's the way it is. So there are unethical practices in conducting research that you have to be able to understand, such as deceiving a respondent about the true purpose of the study. Kunyari, nilihim mo that you're going to do this because you're going to earn money. Okay? Hindi pwede yun, no? Dapat klaro yun from the very beginning that you're going to do this as an academic exercise, as a requirement for the subject in your research class. Now, asking respondent questions that cause him or her extreme embarrassment, guilt, emotional turmoil by remaining him or her of an unpleasant experience. So again, you have to be careful in the questions that you're asking. Okay, be sensitive. Okay, that's why you have to be very careful. Now, invading the privacy of a respondent. You cannot dig, or you cannot, hahalukayin mo yung information that is irrelevant to your research. Let's say you are doing a exploring so you're going to do, let's say, an ethnographic research of working single parents, no? Let's say in a call center agency, hindi mo po pwedeng tanungin, let's say, ano ano nangyari doon sa asawa ninyo? Bakit ho kayong naging single? No, you can't do that. You are invading the privacy of a respondent, which is irrelevant to your research. So number 4, studying the respondent or research subjects without their knowledge. So you can't do that, no? Hindi mo pwedeng pag-aralan yung lived experience, let's say, ng single parents without asking their permission. When analyzing the data, revealing only parts of the facts. So when you have interviewed them, you get the result, you're not going to show them the actual transcription or yung in-interview mo sa kanila in the transcription, hindi pwede yun. Dapat kung ano yung sinabi nila, yun yung lalabas doon. Presenting facts out of context, okay, falsifying the findings, or offering misleading presentations such as lying with statistics. Although you're not going to use statistics naman dito, pero iniba mo kunyari yung mga sinabi nila to make appear your research is, connected to the research question that you're asking para tumama doon. That's wrong. And in the Philippines, we have the so-called Intellectual Property Code of the Philippines, yung pagmamay-ari, no? That contains provision regarding published works and copyright ownership. So that's why it's illegal to plagiarize. So sinasabi ko na sa inyo, you can be put to jail, pwede kang mademanda, and that's why you cannot do that. You cannot just simply cut and paste without citing the owner of that particular paragraph or information. So that's within the Republic Act 8293. So there are differences between the fact and opinion, objective and subjective. Tingnan natin to, no? There is reliability, meaning, is your text reliable ba? Is it dependable? Kunyari, yung mga processes nyo ba, is it correct? Yung research design nyo ba, tama ba yan? If someone's going to ask, what's your research design? You can answer them, it's a case study. Pag tinanong later ng case study, sinong author ng case study mo? It could be Robert Yin, it could be Creswell, or the other authors who is doing a case study. So when you talk about being objective, a point of view that is not influenced by personal feelings or prejudice based on facts, they are unbiased. And subjective point of view that is based on person's own moods, the attitudes, and opinions. Sabi nila, ang qualitative research is somewhat subjective. Tama naman yun, no? Because you are getting descriptions from the senses of your participants. There are certain bias when you do research, a point of view or interpretation that is slated or inspired with prejudice or the personal feelings. Minsan, when you do research, kasi ginagawa mo yan because you're into it. Okay? You're into it. For example, you'd like to venture a new business. Kaya gusto mong malaman yun, pero ikaw mismo, may business ka ng ganun. So you're being biased. So you might want to do a research na hindi biased, na hindi ka tatanungin. Kaya mo pala ginawa yung research na yan because you yourself, you currently have the same business. So you might want to think of a certain research proposal or a topic na walang bias. Okay? So being subjective, it's on your very own opinion. There's judgment, assumption, the belief, rumor, suspicion. Okay? So look for the 3 R's. It must be reliable. Have you heard of the author? Sino yung author nun? Okay, especially in your review of related literature, you have to find, according to Dakanay D 2022, he said that blah, blah, blah. Has your teacher mentioned an author? Let's say, according, I remember, our teacher made mention of Robert Yin being one of the lead authors in a case study. What are the author's credentials? Is the author biased or objective? And recent. I told you it should be 5 years, no, when you try to collect information. So 2022, 21, 20, 19, or 18. Baka siguro 2015, pwede pa yun, no? But lower than mas maano sa 2015, medyo baka tanungin na kayo. And it should be relevant. Does the book have material you can use? Does it support your research, or is it related to your topic, or is it just uninteresting data? Okay, so we will skip on that. No, those are nice to know things. Okay, so again, to somewhat again summarize this discussion, when we talk about research, you will again investigate to develop new insights. You have to do verification. You have to test the new facts. You really have to read. You have to analyze its relationship and the causal explanations and the development of new tools through observations and practical experiences. Okay? So the outcome of your research is very important because it can help to change the way things are. For enlightenment, for you to be able to understand the processes. Kaya pala, patok na patok ang business na to kasi nga ganito. However, merely systematic and organized inquiry of research is not sufficient to generate new impactful knowledge. The researchers need to adopt a value-free, you should not be biased, rightly for choosing the post potential among the possible options due to welfare of the humanity. Sabat, hindi ka daw bias. Okay? Of course, ethics should be considered. Empirical or theoretical research techniques, it requires improved approach that might create high impacts in the different fields of research. And that's why in your review of related literature, titignan rin dyan yung mga theoretical framework ninyo, yung theories that you will be using, primarily in your explanation of your topic. Okay. I think, yeah, let me just end my share screen. Okay, so ayun, I think for this meeting, I told you the importance of primarily of ethics, no, which is very important in our journey in creating your research papers later on. Okay, so again, in our next meeting, I think in our next meeting we'll be doing face-to-face. You will have to be able to come up with your five topics, okay? Basing it in, again, yung ating parameters, it should be interesting, it should be feasible, it should add to the new body of knowledge, okay? So remember those parameters, it should be interesting, it should be feasible, it should add to the new body of knowledge, okay? So the 5 topics, we will be doing that later on. And we'll do an activity in terms of our initial activity for your research subject. Okay? Sige. I will have to take a photo of those who are present currently. Okay. Can you switch on your cameras again, class? Sige. Para, ayan. Again, hindi mo tayong title, I said earlier, wala mo ng title, topics pa lang tayo, ha? So think of 5 topics and be specific about it. Masalimuot pa yung title, ha? Just topics, general topics that you'd like to do. Basing it on the parameters that we're going to be able to do. Dapat, it should be interesting. It should be based on your interest as well. It should be feasible. It should add to the new body of knowledge. Dapat yun yung parameters na susundan natin. So we will have to do that in our next meeting, the face-to-face. So you will have to present that, no, in class during our actual discussion. Sige, let me just take a photo of the class for the attendance. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we're ending our class now. So I'll be seeing you in our next meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good day.